trying to take the step away from committed suicide because it makes it sound like a crime, and then trying to take a step away from attempted suicide because it makes it seem like by surviving you failed.
That's a heavy way to talk about it.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
And so the preferred language that I put on there that is rather recent. It's not like you're out of touch.
Right.
But saying died by, he died by suicide rather than he committed suicide. And then...
Because committed does seem like a crime.
Right.
I did a charity a little bit ago, I guess last year, for opportunity youth.
Yeah.
The terminology used to be at-risk youth.
Yeah.
And when you say somebody's at risk,
it's like at risk.
It just makes them seem like a potential mugger. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas if you say opportunity youth, the opportunities are endless. You know what I mean? And I think it really, the verbiage is important.
Yeah, and so now, there could be an opportunity in the podcast where you say, like, when I was talking to you about this before or whatever, I talked about someone I knew who had committed suicide, et cetera, or whatever, and you kind of, like, I could see your hair, or, like, I could see you kind of, you wanted to tell me something. What's that all about? And it's like, well, here's the deal.
I like it.
Yeah.
Well, it's recording now.
Oh, easy.
So we're in the podcast mode.
Okay.
So, hi everybody. Welcome to another episode of Unsolicited Advice. It's been a while since I've done an episode of Unsolicited Advice, but my friend Tony Tipton has an amazing project that he's working on, and I wanted to do anything I could to help. And so here we are. We're sitting, and we're going to talk about the mental health, unsolicited mental health advice from Jacob and Tony. Tony, want to introduce yourself?
Thank you so much for having me. And it's just, I really think that what you do on Unsolicited Advice is art. And just the opportunity to come here means a lot. And my name's Tony Tipton. I'm a volunteer counselor and trainer for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And my most recent venture is that I'm the founding partner and the CEO of Oslo Crisis Line Tech.
Oslo Crisis Line Tech.
Yeah, that's it.
CEO and founder.
Yeah.
So, okay, wonderful title, by the way. That sounds really nice.
Cheers.
Because you're cheers. Because you're the trainer at a suicide prevention hotline.
Yeah.
You came into work a couple times to try to recruit. When we used to work together, Third in Hollywood, you came in a couple times to try to recruit people to the hotline. It is a lot of training that you guys have to go through. It's an unbelievable amount of training you have to go to as a volunteer.
Right.
Which is a curse and a blessing, I'm sure, because it makes it a full-time commitment to be a part-time volunteer. So you have to really be dedicated to the cause. How long have you been working at the hotline?
Absolutely. I'm finishing my 18th month.
18th month.
Yeah.
So like a year and 6 months. Year and a half.
Right.
That's crazy.
And we just finished, my class just graduated training this past Wednesday.
So that was the first class you took through as a trainer?
Yeah.
Oh,
shepherding
so cool.
them, 5 young minds, one mind who's older than me, so
That's
but
really cool.
all willing to learn and green when it came to suicide prevention and crisis prevention. And training is a big commitment.
Yeah.
But in the end, you're grateful that it was so thorough. It's over the course of 6 weeks, and it's essentially Wednesday nights and Saturday during the day. And then you get to start. Yeah.
Yeah. What are some of the things that you see in the training that most people could benefit from knowing?
I think the basis of assessment, which we use an acronym, and I'll get into the first 3 parts of it, PIM, and it's essentially, do you have a plan? Do you have intent? Which means, are you answering yes to the question, are you thinking suicide? And
so this is from you take the call.
Yeah.
You hear the call, and you go, do they have a plan? Do they have intent? Do they have...
The means
Oh.
is the M. And if so, can you distance them from those means in the moment? And a great deal of calls that we take are actually third-party calls. So someone who's concerned about their brother or their friend, and we kind of guide them through. And if you're unsure whether you should suggest seeing a counselor or whether you should drive someone to the emergency room, we always say that like threshold that's crossed has it reached the point where they have a plan, they're answering yes to the suicide question, and they have the means that they're describing,
Means would be a way of successfully, a tool, or
actually going about it. Yeah,
right,
how. The
how they want to do it. And then PIM. That's the first part? Or is that the whole...
That's the first part.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's the second part?
And we can go. So the full acronym is actually PIMP DADS.
Pimp Dads?
Yeah. And I'll just throw it out there because I think your listening body will appreciate it. But I gave you the first three, and then it rounds out with acting on previous behavior, and then drug and alcohol use.
Yeah.
And like alcohol in its own category, whether they've been using it right now, if they've ever been diagnosed with a mental illness, and then the last one is support. And so in forming an assessment, you're kind of balancing all those, the first 7 variables with the support. And
of a reliable family member, of somebody who's present or there.
A mental health professional, anyone who's trusted. And that can be huge. And the thing about it is, when we practice making these assessments, it's amazing that a really intact support system can still render someone kind of a low moderate risk, even if they're answering yes to a few of those questions that we talked about.
So meaning that support is one of the best factors to preventing the suicide from happening.
Absolutely. And conversely, we find that isolation, the feeling of being alone is, I would venture to say the most often cited, issue.
Yeah.
The thing that comes up.
One, so articulate you are. It's I haven't heard your voice in like 4 months, or I don't know how long it's been, but it's nice to hear your voice again, so you're very fun to talk to. My uncle always asks about, he's been bringing up a lot, suicide, because it seems to be like a plague, and that it's hitting a lot of people, and he's seeing it, weirdly enough, in his own age range, as like a, 60-year-old.
Yeah.
And then he asked me, like, what do you think it is? And I think it's the isolation thing. He goes, well, we're more connected than ever with the phones and everything. And I was like, well, yeah, but I think that's when the pendulum swings so far with the connectedness. Yes, you can always be on Instagram, you can always be calling a friend, you can FaceTime, you can do all these things. You don't have to just... The opposite's very true. Like, all of that can be very isolating within itself, because when there's so many ports to sail to, sometimes you probably just get very anxious and are stuck at sea by yourself in like your head, I guess.
It makes sense. There's what we call the presenting problem, just on our line in particular, which is, can you narrow it down to something that happened today or this week that you think is leading you to feel this bad?
Right.
And while that helps us in developing rapport, the truth is that suicidality is so complex. even if something did happen today, you lost your job, your relationship ended, something along those lines, the kind of framework that would lead you to consider taking your own life was probably coming together long before
that moment,
presenting problem.
That might have been the straw.
Yeah. And one of the things we train against is asking the question, why? Why do you feel this way? Like it never comes out in that way.
Yeah.
And it's worth thinking, though, these trends are rising every year. They're becoming more frequent. And now, second to traffic accidents, suicide is the leading cause of death for young people, 15 to 24. And so even though I'm not saying it out loud on the hotline, I look at those statistics, and the big blaring question in my mind is why? And will we see a day where it levels off or starts to decrease?
Right.
And if so, why?
Yeah, you have to find the correlations.
Right.
I like that you said you don't ask why. So I've never done any training on helping an individual in a crisis situation mentally, but I've heard a lot of people talk about their training.
Yeah.
And one of the trainings that I found most interesting is at Burning Man at the I've taken too much of the drugs tent, and you're helping people who are kind of who are having a bad experience. They come into the tent, they say, my camp is trying to kill me, right? Everybody's after me. The first thing you don't say, no, they're not. You don't disagree. You don't ask, why do you think that? You don't challenge them. You just say, that must really suck. That sounds like a terrible experience, man. I'm sorry you're going through that, man or girl. And it's funny because it's counterintuitive to what people think is the right response. The right response would be, no, you're fine. And inciting more paranoia. What are some of the do's and don'ts, myths, and facts in the world of the hotline?
That's a great question. You're touching on an overarching approach, which is that suicide and crisis, I'll say that crisis is subjective. Okay. And especially working in Columbus, where there are so many students, like 4 major universities, and what doesn't seem like a crisis to me might very well be for someone else
a crisis.
And so having that empathy, you said, like in the tent, is huge, because to them in the moment it is real and it is a crisis,
and that's their whole world at that moment.
Yes. And so it's great that you realize that and that you've heard that before. And I think one of the messages that I would love to get out to your listeners today is kind of like, what do they do if they find themselves in a suicidal crisis? And touching on some of those myths might really help. I think one myth that's out there is that if you have suicidal thoughts, something is broken inside of you, or you're ungrateful for everything that you have. And that's just not the case. Even in people who are functioning at, a full normal mental capacity, suicidal thoughts are not unusual. And there's a difference between having suicidal thoughts and being actively suicidal, and knowing that, and then distancing yourself from the guilt that might arise from them coming in your head is really key for a lot of people. So we find ourselves reminding people of that a lot. This is a normal occurrence, and it doesn't mean that you're broken. It doesn't even mean,
there's
that you
anything
have some
really
sort of
wrong.
pathology. You know, if you're having suicidal thoughts, I do encourage seeking, you know, a mental health professional to kind of rule a lot of that out. But it's correlation, not causation, oftentimes.
I like that.
Yeah.
At the hotline, do you guys have access to mental health professionals that you can tell people to go, or do you... Because I watched Hassan Minhaj Patriot Act before you came over to do the podcast, and it was the new one about mental health.
Yeah.
And I thought timing perfect.
Okay, I haven't seen it yet.
It's great. Finding a mental health professional can be really hard.
It can be, and it can be...
And insurance, and the whole attack sorry to interrupt, but the whole attack he has on the problem, the whole angle he takes, is that he correlates he talks about the insurance issues. Mm-hmm. Insurance covers mental health. Sometimes, but they do it in a very poor way, and they do it in they try their hardest not to give the financial insurance. They try very hard to not pay. Mm. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times it has to come out of these people's pockets.
Right.
Which is a challenge.
Yes.
Because if you break your arm, it costs $1 million. If you have to go see somebody once a week, it can slowly, over time, cost, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Mm-hmm. So how do you help people find mental health professionals?
Well, you're touching on the importance of what we call community mental health care. And that's what the hotline is and kind of why it exists. Because navigating that realm of healthcare, and especially mental health care, because there are so many, there are subjective facets that where, someone at your insurance company can look at your broken arm and tell that your arm's broken. But it's really tough to convey at times what's going on inside your mind.
There is no X-ray to see these issues. Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
I'm almost mad at myself now that I used the broken arm analogy. Yeah. Because one, so black and white. Yeah. Is my arm broken? Yes. Is my arm broken? No. See you later. But I'm not trying to say that people are broken mentally. Yeah. It's just one is very black and white. The other one is very gray, very askew, very hard to narrow down. It
actually is an apt metaphor. Like, don't beat yourself up, and we'll come back to it. Yeah. But to answer your question, in the crisis moment, I like people to know that the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline exists. The number is 1-800-273-TALK. And we listen to a full spectrum of callers who are somewhere in this mental health journey. And if they don't know at all what to do, we guide them through, like, a good step would be looking at your actual insurance card, if you're lucky enough to have it, calling the number on your insurance card, and they're able to give you a list of local providers. Right. If you don't have insurance, we're lucky enough in Franklin County that we have a couple different services that don't require insurance.
Sorry to interrupt. Does your hotline just do Franklin County?
Primarily. Okay. The way that the hotline is set up, our center will answer for anyone who has a 614 or 740 area code.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And the entire country is kind of partitioned into these different call centers based on population. And in Ohio, we're actually quite the outliers in a very lucky way that we have 11 call centers going.
Which is not that very many.
That's actually quite a lot.
Oh, okay.
So that's why our call center can focus on just 2 area codes in a major city.
The benefit is because that way it's like kids in a classroom. If there's fewer kids in a classroom, the teaching is better.
We can focus. We can get to know the resources better. Absolutely. And so depending on whether or not you're a veteran, how old you are, and kind of like in what part of Columbus you live, we might recommend different resources for you.
Makes sense.
But that's a role. It's important to talk about that realm because I think to myself quite often, what is the role of the hotline? Why don't we take that time, why don't the people who have devoted years and years and years to this hotline just devote that same time to like becoming a licensed,
therapist,
clinical counselor?
Right.
Why don't they do that? And isn't that better for everyone? And then in practice, I find that someone who is lucky enough to have a job, they're lucky enough to have health insurance, and they've called and because they realize they're in a crisis, and the licensed clinical counselor can see them in 5 weeks.
You're the first responder.
Right.
Which is huge.
So that's not an uncommon story. Or, a story which hits home to me is that I found myself in a very serious mental health crisis. I did, quote unquote, the right thing, which was make an appointment for a counselor, and then had a really adverse experience with that counselor that led me to want to give up. And sometimes the overarching advice that we give people is like, I want to help you try something else. Like, I want to help you try a similar step or take you in a new direction. And that's the role of community healthcare. And yes, it's right now. There's someone to help you right now. And at 4:00 in the morning, that might make all the difference for someone.
No, it could be it.
Yeah,
that could be the one thing they need.
It doesn't discriminate. You don't save your mental health crisis for business hours.
Right. And I've heard that a lot. I've had several people in my life in different capacities all seek counseling at one time or another.
Yeah.
And the amount of time that it takes to see somebody.
Yeah.
You got to put it on the books 5 weeks. You get there. The first experience isn't the greatest. You go again 3 weeks later. Still not the great. Then you decide that counselor's not the counselor for me. Then you have to go to another one.
Yeah.
And then the whole time the doctor's trying to balance you out on you've been prescribed a certain set of medications.
Yeah.
But, you go a little heavy at first, and then you dial it back, and then maybe that's just not enough. So, and that whole process takes 3 months.
Yeah.
So you're trying to find a counselor. You're on your different cocktail stuff. And it just seems like a real hard fight to fight while you're also trying to fight this internal battle that you've been dealing with. And now you're actively trying to fix it, but it almost seems like what you said. I can see it making you seem like this is unfixable.
Absolutely. And to me, you are getting to the core of why this is so important to me. Yeah. That this exists and that people know that this exists. Because it can make all the difference just to have someone, and I was lucky enough to have people in my life who said, you know what, you are doing the right thing. I see you trying, and I know that it's frustrating, and I know that this, isn't the way it would work in a perfect world, but keep trying because you'll get there.
You'll find it.
Right. And I even had someone say to me when I was, it was around that time where I had said, counseling just isn't for me. Like, professional mental health is just not for me. And someone said, keep trying, and it's not going to make sense until you are the one that tells someone else to keep trying. And that really, really hit me and resonated. And I think while on the hotline, I hear that person's voice, That's what gets me through a long shift is you know what, this is when it makes sense, when I get to be that person for someone else, saying it's tough. It's not just like, oh, it's tough in the cliche. It's really tough.
It's very tough.
Can be, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing, Don.
Yeah.
Cool. What is I know we had more points. You want to go to part 2 of or do you want to stay on, do more myths? Do more myths and busts?
No, I think you're cool.
I think you're cool, Tony Tipton. Let me just make sure here.
Yeah.
Basic sentiment, not usual mental health. So I love that you keep saying, and that's what it's called, I guess, is community healthcare.
Yeah, community mental health.
Is there more than just a hotline? Do you guys do like, I don't know, is there like meetings of?
Well, there's so many, there are. It falls, yes, community mental health falls under the realm of like different support groups, which may or may not be led by a mental health professional.
Right.
And then also like different peer services, you know?
Hello?
Hey, what's up?
Hey, Ryan.
How you doing? Hey, Ryan.
Got interrupted there. That's all right. Hey, doing a podcast. Yeah, that's all right.
Sure.
Get your laundry. Yeah, I never heard that term, community health care.
Yeah.
Which is cool.
Yeah.
It's a good term.
I like it.
I think it's great.
And I think it's important.
So there's other, I got, that was a big just train of thought. So, how would somebody volunteer? Because I know a bunch of people who are going to listen to this who are very, not excited, but they're very much so in that mental health world. And they, I think community healthcare, or community mental health, is, I'm surprised I've never heard the term, but it seems like just their kind of thing. So what would they do if they want to get involved?
Sure. I would search National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And there's a geographic map of all the centers in the United States that are taking this type of call. So they can pick the one that's closest to them. Mm-hmm. I haven't seen one yet that does not have its own website, and with information about contacting the coordinator or information about volunteering. So I would go National Suicide Prevention Lifeline and then find their local center and reach out. Because each training process is unique and just offered at different times of year. And it was like my journey on this line started when I recommended calling the hotline to a friend who was in a crisis. I was like, I actually don't know a lot about this, and I was really nervous, and I didn't think to be a third-party caller and just say, hey, I'm concerned about this person. But what I did say was like, I think you should call on behalf of yourself and kind of see what happens. And so I gave that advice, unsolicited. And then it weighed on me for a couple days. And I called Hannah, who I now know very well, who's the coordinator of the one here in Franklin County. She works through an organization called North Central Mental Health Services, and said, hi, I gave this information out to my friend who is in a mental health crisis, and I want to know what's going to happen when they call. And it turned out that Hannah was just the most passionate, articulate, organized human being that that I had encountered certainly that week, and now she's in the top 10 of my life. And it was through that conversation.
Yeah, so nice of you to call the thing.
Yeah.
Like you said, hey, I don't know what to do. I'm sorry, I really want to help you. You are my friend. Try this.
Yeah.
And then you weren't sure about the unsolicited advice, so you called back.
Yeah.
It's a very cute story. It's very funny. Good friend, Tony Tip.
I'm really trying. And so it was in talking to Hannah that I heard a lot of the similar things that we've already touched on in our conversation, and was just like, oh my God, this is more important than I thought it was. And when is the next training? And I'll be there.
And so that was like a year and a half ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that happened.
So people should Google, give it to me one more time.
National Suicide Prevention Lifeline.
National Suicide Prevention Lifeline.
Yeah.
And they should, and that's first step to getting involved.
Yes.
As far as training goes, and I might be kind of slowly progressing into Oslo because I do know some things about the training. Sorry, I was reading the thing because there is something I want to touch on in there. But each call center has somewhat different training, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, based on their accreditation. There are a few different accrediting bodies that each offer their own guidelines for what should actually happen on a call.
Right.
And so the training speaks to that.
Very cool. On the list of things that you kind of sent me, there's a thing on here that says, because you've already touched on the training process, and then why it's more important now than ever, the rising numbers, the fact that maybe healthcare is so screwed up, so maybe community mental health care is really an important thing that we should focus on as a community.
Yeah.
But then there's this thing that says strategies for combating compassion fatigue.
Yeah.
What is that?
So compassion fatigue, it is common for anyone who takes care of someone else, and really, really prevalent in the healthcare community because their full day is, taking care of people in a very personal way. And so I wanted to make sure that I at least said something about kind of doing your own inventory of how you practice self-care, and also
Self-care Sundays.
Yeah.
It's nice. Trader Joe's.
Yeah, and then if you are, exactly. And then if you are serious about being a volunteer, you have to make your own plan for what happens if I get overwhelmed, if I experience compassion fatigue, because it can wear you down quickly, and it's something that we have to really watch for. And
because when you're giving and you're giving and you're giving a lot of yourself to, I'm sure on the hotline it happens all the time. If you take 4 or 5 calls on a shift, what's the normal average for calls on a shift? If you had to think about it, I'm sure you don't know the exact statistic, but
sure, I feel like for what I pictured as the call before I started volunteering, you're probably taking 3 of those on a shift.
3 calls.
Yeah. And then peppered in are frequent callers or familiar voices.
Is that what you guys call them? Familiar voices?
Yes. And so those are people who they may or may not be suicidal, but they're definitely lonely, and they definitely see the hotline
as their community.
Yeah.
And a place to talk to somebody.
Exactly. And someone who they know will listen. So there's that.
And calling, I know the answer to this, but calling the hotline is completely anonymous.
It can be, yeah, for sure.
Unless you insist on maybe taking a name or getting a number, so that way you can help if something has gone wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
Precisely. We only know what you tell us.
Right. Because for a lot of, I'm veering off, but like anonymity in this world, because it's such sadly, is still a kind of taboo topic. And anonymity is very important to somebody who might be hesitant to call.
Sure.
Knowing that they're their name's not being used. Like, I have a friend who wouldn't call if he had to put down his name. I just know he wouldn't, which is a shame.
Yeah.
I mean, but at least it's anonymous.
Right.
That's the best part.
Right. The word is stigma.
There's a big stigma, yeah.
And for so many, it's not just a worry that they'll be stigmatized by others, but they really have developed this stigma towards themselves.
Right.
And once again, that by accepting that they're in a mental health crisis, they are also accepting that they are somehow broken or somehow ungrateful, which is likely not the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've touched on this before on the podcast that my dad's like a recovering alcoholic.
Yeah.
And when he was like out of the hospital, in the, getting into the programs, doing all that, we'd talk on the phone like every day for a long time.
Mm-hmm. You're his support.
Right. And we'd kind of ask, and I'd ask him like, how you feel? And then I would talk about how I felt anxious that day. And I was kind of like, because for almost 60-year-old man, with, it being the stigma for such a long time, and now luckily it's breaking through in the media and it's breaking through in just everyday life, that it's, people get anxious, people do get sad, things happen. So we'd talk about literally our feelings.
Yeah.
And I made the joke, I was like, if your dad heard us, me calling you to ask about how you're feeling today, he would probably just not even begin to grapple with that. He would just not even know how to understand it. He'd roll over in his grave.
Yes.
And that stigma just is it's a real shame,
It's fitting that we're here talking about this on Veterans Day.
Oh, that's huge, yeah. That's crazy. I didn't even really make that correlation.
And when I think about stigma, that's a community, along with the transgender community, and the LGBTQ community as a whole, where stigma surrounds everything, and
every step you take. Just,
exactly.
Yeah.
It's so important. So it's so important to recognize and to do, like I said, kind of some introspection as to what your own internal biases are. But yeah, we're here. We're recording on Veterans Day. I believe it's looming at around 20% of those who die by suicide are veterans. Just staggering. And realizing that grappling with suicidal thoughts and seeking help makes you more tough, not less.
Not less tough.
Communicating makes you more tough, not less. That's a message that I would really want to get out.
I like that message too, because it's more to fight something internally isn't really fighting it, it's like dealing with it. Mm-hmm. But if you bring it to the table and you do talk about it, there's a better chance at least of you winning that fight and actually coming to arms with it. And I'm using those terms because they're tough terms.
Yeah.
But communicating is it's a big first step. It can be it's like, I guess, really the only step, right? I mean, other than medication and everything, it's just probably lots of communication and hoping to find a support system.
It's a valuable tool and a valuable component to making it through, depending on what you are actually experiencing. Mm-hmm. And nothing against your podcast, but we try to stay away from unsolicited advice. We try to be very clear that someone is soliciting our advice before we give it. And often, before we even reach that point, someone will make it known that they feel better just by having someone to listen.
And that's giving somebody advice is telling them what to do.
Yeah.
Giving somebody advice, and that's why I guess I'm going to trash the name of the podcast, but that doesn't matter. It's just catchy.
It is. Yeah, I quite like it, don't get me wrong.
It's a good guy,
Yeah.
Especially because having you on, and this being my first episode in a while, had me, like, thinking that my favorite episodes I've done thus far, the one with the ADHD guy and the one with the financial guy, and now a bit of community mental health advice that's unsolicited, right? Like having actual experts giving advice, but it's not advice, it's more so just communicating about this bigger picture.
I think that's why this podcast is art, Jacob, because I'm not sure where I heard it, and I haven't been able to attribute it, but I have one like open Google Doc, and the title is "What is Art?"
Yeah.
And inside it just says, "Using your talent to draw attention to something bigger than yourself." And if anyone knows who said that or wrote that, I would love to know. But that's what you're doing, and I think that that's what we're doing. Is this is bigger than us, and this is bigger than me and the struggle that I went through, and it touches a lot of lives. And so I want your listeners to know that they're not alone, that 24/7 there is someone who is willing to listen and help them step back and reframe some things, and that they are not a burden to anyone.
Right.
That's what I want them to know.
That's the message.
Yeah.
That's a good message, Tony Tipton. If you're going to plug something, that's a good thing to plug.
Yeah.
So back to the training.
Sure.
And you'll see how I loop all this in.
Yeah.
Due to accreditation, each place trains a little differently.
Mm-hmm.
There are some more popularly used methods, and some that are more proven and more beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what your app, Oslo, is based around.
Sure.
Is the idea that, what's his name? The method that you guys use?
So the method, the kind of inventory that is most widely used by members of the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is based around the Columbia Protocol.
Columbia Protocol. I thought it was named after a guy, but no, it's called the Columbia Protocol.
It was developed at Columbia by Dr. Kelly Posner.
Kelly Posner.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna. What's inventory?
It's the things. It's the things that you're looking for. You know, you're taking
an inventory.
You're taking an inventory of what's there.
Right.
So literally, is there a plan there? Are there
you're doing
means
pimp
there?
dad.
You're doing pimp dads.
That's the inventory. Is pimp dads.
Yes.
Pimp dad or pimp dads?
Pimp dads plural.
Multiple dads.
Because the S is support.
Multiple pimp daddies.
You won't forget it now.
No, it's a great acronym.
I know.
Acronyms have to be either slightly inappropriate or just inappropriate.
Yes.
Like pimp dads.
Yes. If you wanted to Google the appropriate one, it's is path warm. Those 3 words, and that's a little bit. It's essentially the same things with a few added components, and that's the one that I believe is like most widely used in an actual hospital emergency room.
Okay.
Yeah, is path warm for suicidality.
So the Columbia method, or what? I'm sorry.
The Columbia Protocol.
Columbia Protocol.
Yeah.
Is the training that you received from the hotline, correct?
Right.
And then, so how does Oslo, the app, play into that?
Sure. It puts... so if your listeners don't know, Oslo is a web-based platform for crisis lines. And
already?
It's
in
development.
You're making it.
Yeah, it's in development. And So if they're like, what is it? It is what the listener is actually looking at on the screen as they're talking to the caller.
Okay.
Okay. And so obviously technologies like this already exist, but what I think makes Oslo different is that it puts that assessment right at the center of the call. And it's not unusual that someone will be crying hysterically. They'll have a pretty pronounced presenting problem. They can very clearly articulate, what's going wrong and why they're feeling suicidal. But when you actually break it down into the components, the data-driven components of suicidality, their risk is actually low. The opposite side of that coin is someone who calls and is very stoic, who's very matter of fact. Hello, my name is.
They're not acting emotionally. They're acting, logically. And
I feel like I'm going to end it all.
Scariest, yeah.
And just talking to them, your gut might say, well, you don't seem
upset at all.
You don't seem upset at all. But when you break it down into, once again, the data-driven points that you should be collecting for suicidality, they're actually throwing up a lot of red flags. And in my experience as the hotline listener, over the course of a call, the average call lasts about 30 minutes.
Makes sense.
It can be easy to forget kind of what you heard at the beginning. And so the most prevalently used programs kind of collect all this like demographic information, which is helpful for reporting in some ways, but don't really touch on the actual assessment for suicidality, and don't really do anything intuitive or anything responsive to what you're inputting.
Okay, so you're on the hotline.
Yeah.
I call you.
Yeah.
I'm talking.
Yeah.
And you're being you're showing your empathy.
I'm listening, yeah.
You're just listening.
Yeah.
You're not giving me advice. You're not telling me to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
You're just being a voice for me.
Mm-hmm.
While I talk, you're using Oslo to just input some of the information that I'm saying.
Yes.
To keep a log, because you are trying to actively listen, but you're also trying to prevent something from happening.
Yes.
You're not just, you're not just a friend to call. You are actively trying to make sure that there is not a risk here.
Yes.
And so that data is collected in Oslo. When you started the conversation, it made it seem like, as the caller, I'd also be looking at Oslo.
Not true.
Right. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
That's what it sounded like.
You're just
first.
on your phone. Yeah. You're just on your phone.
Yeah. Cool. Okay.
This is meant in the realm.
This is a tool for you, the professional.
It empowers. Yeah.
A trained volunteer.
It empowers the people who are trained to help.
Right.
Yeah.
And it empowers you by, like what you just said, if you did hear, you're on your third call of the night, you hang up, and then the calls kind of start coming back to you, drifting in, and you realize that first one, there might have been red flags that you kind of missed.
Yeah.
And so this helps track that and kind of compute it for you and kind of dings the flags as you enter them and collects them.
And is a little bit more active in reminding you, like, you didn't talk about this yet.
It's a guiding tool.
Exactly.
To help guide through the training that you've already gone through. Mm-hmm. But the crazy thing about training, and these aren't fun facts, but they are facts that are short. Like Navy SEALs, or not Navy SEALs, cops, when they're training to disarm people. Mm-hmm. You've seen in the movies where they like flip the gun over.
Yeah.
And how they train is me and you are standing next to each other, and you go, and then I go, then you go, then I go. So a lot of times, police officers, due to the training, when they're in that high-pressure situation, will take the gun, but then give it back. Because that's what you do when you're training. Your body breaks down, and you do what you've done the most. And so these guys always been giving this gun back to the partner. So a lot of times the cop will actively hand the gun back to the assailant. And it's just crazy.
I didn't know that.
Right? And there's other crazy, but that one's just kind of digs it home. So I can assume that your first couple calls, even probably your 100th call, there's going to be like a high pressure to that. You're going to be kind of nervous.
Yeah. There's
probably maybe always a link. Like, do you ever feel comfortable on the line? Like,
there's a rush of adrenaline
right.
every time the phone rings because you don't know what you're going to get. Statistically, it's about 5% of calls, I believe, that are what we consider high risk, imminent risk.
Right.
And so I think that's what people might imagine is that your whole night is like that back to back to back.
Right.
Not the case, but you want to be ready.
Yeah.
And that is...
And as soon as that adrenaline starts flowing, maybe mistakes can start to happen. And that's where Oslo hopefully comes in and helps just smooth it over a little bit. Just gives you a little bit of a guiding star to help through the call while you still are able to actively listen. It's allowing the computer to do a little of the processing for you.
Yeah.
So that way you can be an active listener.
Exactly.
Rather than just thinking, did they say, is this a flat? You know what I mean? Like hitting all the notes in their head.
Right.
Just relying on the app a little bit.
Yeah. We're talking about quality in the moment and delivering the best experience possible for the caller. And then when you picture a busy night on the hotline,
I assume it's like a Tuesday or a Wednesday. Or is it the weekends?
You know, I couldn't say. I couldn't talk about like call flow. The peaks that I note personally, having now worked like morning, evening, and
third shift,
and like overnight, is it seems like when people are either heading to work or coming home from work, is a popular
7 a.m. and like 6 traffic.
Yeah,
that's
is like
rough. That's sad because you think it's like 4 a.m. rainy.
Yeah.
No, it's like a Tuesday and it's 6 and I'm just in traffic again. Right. That's like real.
Like you just have a lot of time to reflect. I don't know. But those are the trends that I note.
Right.
Day to day, I couldn't say.
When I kind of pressed play and just kind of eased into it and then told you we were like recording, we were talking about changing the conversation or changing the dialogue rather.
Yeah.
I like to kind of like retouch on that because I do think it's really important.
Sure.
Like I was saying, changing at-risk youth to opportunity youth.
Yeah.
It just flips the whole conversation. It just makes it seem like, what are the opportunities for these kids? Like, what can we do?
Yeah.
And so what is some of the flips that you're seeing in the community, mental health, and I guess health, I hope the healthcare system as well.
Yeah, when we talk about it, it is really important. Like word choice is so important. And a few of the examples that have really resonated with me are using the phrase died by suicide as opposed to anything else. You know, there are a couple different ways that people will describe it, but, you know, a person died by suicide. And
that's the preferred vernacular?
Yes. And it eliminates the implication that a crime was committed.
Because killed... Well, okay, so what's the... I guess I'm lacking in the inappropriate vernacular, but I know it. I know if I just thought about it, I'd say it, but right now I'm drawing blanks.
Sure. Well, there are a lot of different there are a lot of different ways, and it's not that they're inaccurate. It's about what is preferred.
Right.
And
so death by suicide.
Yeah.
Not committed suicide.
Not committed suicide.
Is I committed a misdemeanor. I committed a felony. I committed suicide. It's putting it on that same bar as a crime.
Yeah.
Because it is technically a crime, isn't it? The legal system.
A crime that in some places, so it's like an artful segue to the next one, which is that someone acted on their suicidal thoughts, as opposed to attempted suicide.
Right, because again, attempted the crime. Attempted to do something.
Yes.
This was, I had thoughts and I acted on them.
But I'm still here talking to you.
Right.
Yeah. So what I will say is that in some places, yes, it is a crime to act on your suicidal thoughts.
It's a shame. Do you think, and I don't know if you know, like I used to know the word for, the word itself or the history of a word. Anthology of a word?
I think you're looking for etymology.
The etymology of a word.
Yeah.
So, or the etymology of the language.
Yeah.
Do you think it maybe was just like in hospitals when the rates for this was all very lower, but I think they were just lowerly reported. I don't know if they necessarily were lower. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. Mm-hmm. But do you think just doctors being doctors using just terms that weren't really sensitive or insensitive, they're just how they are, started this lingo? Or do you think that like the mental health, like who, I guess it's a question that if you don't, it's a hard question to answer, but where do you think the original language of it all came from? But if you don't know, I guess you just don't know. If you had to guess.
Yeah. So I'll say I don't know. If I had to guess, I would say that there are many schools of thought that would view taking your own life as a crime. As a crime against society or a higher power, et cetera, et cetera.
Especially in America with its ethics being of a Judeo-Christian nature from like the get-go.
And, well, debatable in itself.
Right.
But what I'll say is that I think that that's where I think that that's why committed
has been the vernacular for so long.
Is the go-to for so many people.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then my preference to stay away from attempted, suicide attempt is very much, that's grounded in my own personal belief that if you're still here, that's not you failing at anything. So you acted on your suicidal thoughts, and I'm incredibly sorry about that. But I'm incredibly grateful that you're still here. It is the way, once again, that there are lots of ways to talk about it, and not all of them are inaccurate. But that's my preferred way to talk about it.
I love that. And I think, again, language being part of communication, the tool of communication, is really the first thing that, like, I can't spell and I can't write very well. And I mess up words all the time. But if you can change just what you're saying, they're not complicated words, you know what I mean? They're just little changes, and it can make a really big difference.
Yeah.
And I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Because, this is why I don't have a blog. I have this so I can talk, because I can kind of do that. Where are you guys in the development of Oslo?
Yeah, if a listener would find themselves interested in Oslo, in particular, this piece of technology, we're actively looking for our seed funders, and open to talking to anyone about routes for that. So,
have you guys tried crowdfunding?
We've made the decision against that.
Okay.
And I won't bore anyone with the details there, but that's I do have a partner named Joe Chekhanoff, who's a lovely human being and really a driving force for a lot of the things that are making Oslo what it is. And in many conversations with Joe, we're choosing a different route.
Understood.
Yeah. And then we're also seeking a team. So everything from developers, people who are interested in front end, back end, full stack, people who are interested in automatic call distribution, which is a component of Oslo, people who are interested in data reporting, data science for the greater good. We have to be able to take what's happening within Oslo and export it elegantly into Tableau so that
the
world can make use of that information, and some of it goes back into the community because it really makes a difference. So if you have interest there, and then on the Tony Tipton end of things, if you're into giving a very important brand its voice, if you're interested in like the marketing aspect or any type of, kind of like business guidance, then I'd be happy to talk with someone about that. Yeah, and I've really been impressed at the number of people who have said like, yeah, I'm willing to help in any way possible, including yourself. And I want to take this opportunity to shout out the Best Friends 5 Ever and tie it in. So hello, Jake, Gerald, and Evelyn. But tie it in that some of our best contacts that we've made who are helping us through this process were because Jake Gerald took the time to help us compile a contact list. And that was him saying, like, I love this idea and I want to help any way I can, and took time out of his day to help compile some contacts, and some of them turned out to be really fruitful. No, he didn't know them.
But he just helped.
But it was just like, we think these are the people that we need, help us get a hold of them.
I love that.
So he took a day with a laptop and a phone and, didn't need to know anything about suicidality to be interested and get involved.
And to help.
Yeah. Right. And we still see, it makes me laugh out loud because one of those people, I was responding to his email before this,
right.
And
it's still, and you guys are still communicating, which is huge, right?
And that was a lead of like Jake Gerald saying, "Oh, I got an email for this guy," and that's months ago.
Oh, I love Jake Gerald.
I know.
Good
so
guy.
What a sweetheart.
And Evie, I'm sure you'll throw in your hat here soon. I hope you listen.
She's emotional support for me on a daily basis.
That's all you need.
Yeah.
So that's where you are in the development process.
Yeah.
You did what you need from people who are listening. You need help. You need hands.
Yeah, I think if they want to know more, the Oslo Crisis Line Tech.com exists.
It'll be linked in the YouTube page.
Great.
I'll link it in whatever
else. You can visit there.
Facebook and all that.
And then Oslo Crisis Line Tech has an Instagram presence as well.
Is it called Oslo Crisis Line Tech?
Yeah.
Crisis.
Yeah. So you can read more about it, and those like I'm Tony T at, or you can email like info at, and ask any questions that you would have, or just say that you'd like to.
You're Tony T at Oslo Crisis Line Tech.com.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll do links. That way nobody has to write it down or anything.
Exactly.
It'll be better.
Sure.
Avenues for seed funding, you have it written here. I mean, if anybody, they have the information if they want to find it. There's some VC people in Columbus.
Absolutely. And that's kind of what I'm talking about. Like, if you are an accredited investor, you are. And if you know one, we'd love to talk to them.
And I think right now it's a shame that this is a epidemic of a crisis.
Yes.
It's a shame.
It is.
But at the same time, for the first time, really, the stigmas are getting washed away. So there's it's just like I said earlier, the pendulum swings the other way. When one thing's going crazy, good things happen. It's not, we wish they didn't have to happen at all, but I think now is a good time for an app like this, you know what I mean? And to talk about an app like this where a regular person such as myself wants to know more, because we see it happening all around us, and it helps to understand these big issues.
Yeah.
And it makes them seem not so scary.
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess.
So can I offer some final?
Please do. That sounds
Can we
great.
call it semi-solicited advice?
Yeah.
Okay.
That sounds
Some
awesome.
semi-solicited advice. I would just want anyone listening to know that if you find yourself in a suicidal crisis, you are not alone. There's someone 24/7 who wants to listen, and you are not a burden because you're experiencing this. The number to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 1-800-273-TALK, and it will link you to the center that covers your area code. So it might not be in the city where you find yourself at that moment. If you are not experiencing a mental health crisis, one of the best things you can do is volunteer for your local hotline to give back in that way. And if that's not your thing, you could talk to me about getting involved with Oslo Crisis Line Tech, because we're looking for people.
Need help.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on, Tony.
This was an absolute pleasure. This was so much fun.
Did we hit on everything that you would like to hit on? That's important to hit on?
Yeah.
Okay. I love you very much.
I love you too.
Thanks for coming on, buddy.
Thanks for having me on, JZ.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
All right. We'll talk to you guys soon, I hope. I hope I do another one soon, but I felt this was a really important one to do.
Thanks.
So help Tony out with Oslo, and we'll see you guys soon.
Thanks for helping me.
No problem.